Hi, my name is Greg and welcome to what will be chapter 12 in my 1949 P3 Rover restoration story. In this chapter I'm going to cover similar material to what was covered in chapter 11. However, in this chapter I'll focus on work that was done on the body and body repairs on the car with the body off the chassis. This chapter will cover the work really right up until the end of the body repair process, to the point where the body is ready for the paint shop. Again, I hope you find it interesting and informative. I think I'll also probably do a bit of reflecting on the project as a whole, because it has been challenging, more challenging than I ever imagined it would be. And I'll be honest, I thought I'd probably get this car restored in a quarter of the time that it's taken. Also I think it's probably cost about 6 times what I imagined it would as well. But yeah, I thought it might be worth reflecting on that. But anyway, I'll catch up with you later, and hope you enjoy it.
Now we're starting off here where the last video ended, which is beginnings of removing the body from the chassis. Now the main reason for doing this is that it gave access to areas of the body that required rust repair. I mean, initially I was hoping that I wouldn't have to go this far, but I did. And here we have it, body off. Looks kind of weird, doesn't it? At this point I had the rear axle removed with a view to just getting all the bits and pieces of the rear suspension cleaned up. There turned out to be a fair bit of work to do on the rear suspension, but I'll cover that in the next chapter. You can just see some internal bracing that was put inside the body here, which had been done to stop the body from twisting as it's removed from the chassis. Now we have the underside of the boot here, which shows some of the area that required rust repair. It turns out as you actually clean it up, it becomes evident just how bad the rust is. In the end I opted for this entire section to be cut out and replaced with new steel. This section is the bottom sort of back corner of the car body on the passenger side, although unfortunately the driver's side looks pretty similar as well in terms of the amount of rust in it. The extent of the rust in this area took me by surprise initially, but I guess perhaps it shouldn't have. There are various sort of spots here where there are multiple sort of layers of steel, and it is in a lower corner of the car, so basically moisture accumulates in that area, and it's just a bit of a rust trap really. A big section of steel cut out here ready for rust repair. This shot shows where the hinge pin for the boot goes. I didn't know that I had a rust problem there, but you guessed it, I did. I'm pretty sure this is after the body shell came back from sandblasting to remove the last of the paint and also to reveal any further rust issues. The sandblasting was done by a company out at Wingfield in Adelaide that do a pretty good job of this sort of thing. Body shell being prepped for rust primer now. And here we have the primer going on. It was important that the primer went on at this point after the sandblasting, because the sandblasting just leaves completely bare metal, which would then rust. Well, perhaps predictably the sandblasting revealed more rust problems. So in this photo you can see some holes there. This is towards the front of the car, where there's two sort of side panels either side of the engine, so it's in that area. I thought the most logical way of going through this would be to show some of the sections that need repair, and then immediately afterwards show the same section after it's been repaired. Looking at a section of the floor of the body shell here, yet more holes. This section was shown in one of the previous photos, and in this case would have cut out a small section of steel, fashioned up a steel patch and then welded it in and blended it. Now another problem area that the sandblasting revealed was just on both sides of the body where the rear door sort of shut. It's a bit hard to describe, but it'll be a bit little clearer as we go through the photos. So I'll just show the rust holes and the repair of this section. The rust holes are just a little bit worse here on the driver's side, where the holes extend a little bit into the wheel arch as well. I'll just go through the sequence of the repair process on that section of the door opening that was shown just a few shots ago. So a section of steel is cut out until you get to sort of sound metal. Also some repair there done on the captive nuts. New steel welded in and largely smoothed off by this point. And now to repair that section where the door opening sort of blends into the wheel arch. And now more of the same on the other side. This section where you can see a few holes is just below the windscreen. Opted for a bit of a more economical option in this case, where the holes are simply welded shut, as opposed to having a section of steel cut out and then a new section of steel fashioned and welded in. And now back to what proved to be a fairly major problem area right at the sort of rear corner of the body.
Well, hi, I'm back again. It just thought it'd be good to have a bit of a break from the slideshow sort of segment of this video, and just reflect on where we're up to with the project overall. Now, as you can see, I've had some pretty considerable rust issues to deal with my Rover. The rust has proved to be far more extensive than I anticipated when I bought the car. I mean, I did have a pretty good look at it when I bought it, and a lot of the issues that have become apparent, really weren't apparent until you dug pretty deep. I suspect this is perhaps a common problem that people would face when they're restoring cars from this sort of era. Back 70 years ago, the rust proofing on cars was nowhere near as good as it is today. I suspect even the quality of the steel back then maybe isn't as good as it is today, and that also makes the cars more prone to rust. I guess to be honest, I've had a few times when I've thought to myself, what have I got myself into here? It's difficult. So I guess I got all the rust repaired that could be done in the body on sort of segment, and I was initially anticipating that's all it was going to require. And then you get to a point where you've already invested a lot of time, a lot of money into the project. In a sense, there seems to be no going back from there. You either write all that off, or you just continue doing whatever it requires to get it finished. So yeah, it's been difficult, I guess, coming to that realisation. But having said all that, I have no regrets. I still think the project's very much worthwhile to finish, and I'm looking forward to finishing it. Anyway, with all that said, I'll get back to the slideshow now, and I'll see you probably at the end of the video. Okay, bye.
I ended up having fairly substantial bits of steel cut out of both of the rear corners, but we'll cover that as we go along now. There was originally multiple layers of steel here, but in repairing it, it's been simplified somewhat, and we're just using thicker gauge steel and no more than sort of 2 layers at any point, thus creating less of a rust trap, hopefully. There's also a section you can see here that's been lead white from a previous repair, so that was redone as well. This shot just shows where the boot hinge pins go, so it's really just a before and after shot of the repair work. Well, at least the problem was pretty consistent. What tended to need repair on one side also needed repair on the other side. There tended to be quite a few holes throughout both wheel arch areas. This shot is just the top of the wheel arch taken from inside the car. More holes inside the wheel arch. This tended to be a fairly simple repair, apart from the fact that there were lots of them. There were a couple of very rough holes that had been cut previously. I'm not sure when it was done, but I think the holes were cut so that the cable from the aerial could sort of go through there. So I opted to have those closed off, and I'll go for a roof-mounted aerial. Getting towards what's sort of felt like an epic rust repair job overall. These few holes are just in the sort of boot, sort of, I guess you call it a sort of lip area, really. Yeah. And just a few remaining small holes in the firewall to repair here. And the corner of the windscreen here after repair.
Well, hi, just another short break from the slides. I thought it would be easier just to explain what's going on in some of the shots that are to come, where I'm going to sort of cover some of the work that was done on the repair of the boot lid. It's a wee bit complicated. Now, I thought the boot lid on my car was in pretty good shape, but yeah, you guessed it, it proved not to be. Fortunately, I had a spare boot lid, so what I'm going to cover in this next segment is how we built one good boot lid out of two, and try and explain why that was the best way to go. I hope it all makes sense.
This is the original boot lid, and as you can see, there's been some previous repair done on it. The cutout here is largely for investigation, really, just to see what the internals are like, and yep, it was rusty. In the end, it became evident that the best way to tackle this was to really cut pretty much the lower half of the boot lid off, and then graft the lower half from the spare boot lid onto the original boot lid. Before tackling the sort of external skin problems on the boot lid, there was quite a bit of work to do on the internal structure of the boot. Here we're starting to see new steel being grafted into that sort of lower internal section of the boot lid. In the end, to get all the rust out, had to have the entire lower internal section rebuilt. Here's my spare boot lid, about to donate some of itself to the original boot lid. Also some pretty significant rust issues on the spare boot lid, but all I really required was just half the external skin. Well progressed now, with the lower section here being from the donor boot lid. Very impressed with the bit of work. I got no idea how they would have done this. The next task, just to finish this off, was just to get all the gaps right around the edge. This is taken inside the boot not long before I dropped the car off for a repair. I think I was fitting the rear shock absorbers on this day. So just really showing this so you can see what we started off with in this section of the car. Here's the underside of that boot section again. As you can see, it's not looking too good, but as you sort of scrape under the surface, it looks even worse. I've skipped ahead a fair way to get to this point, but all new steel in that section now. Had to be put in two halves because there was basically no other way to get it in otherwise. The next and I think final rust issue was the boot floor. Didn't look too bad until after it was sandblasted, but after sandblasting there was quite a few holes in it and pretty rough overall, and also some evidence of some past repair that wasn't done all that well. New steel being formed up to replace the old boot floor now. Well, we've come a long way. I guess you could say there's more new steel in the back end than old now. Well, I knew we'd get there eventually. All the rust repaired in the body now. The doors are actually in good shape, so here we're starting to see the doors refitted.
Well, hi again, and thanks for watching Chapter 12 in my 1949 P3 Rover restoration story. I hope to get Chapter 13 out pretty soon. I've been working on the rear suspension, and I've got a piece of it here in my voice, so I'll cover that in the next chapter. I haven't been putting much out in terms of videos just recently because I have had to put the project on hold, just put a bit of a halt to the work at the restoration workshop just due to the cost of it, which is obviously blown out a bit due to the amount of work on the body. But I should be able to get things back on track, I think beginning of next month. That's March 2019. Get things rolling again. So the next jobs, the restoration workshop will be repainting, reassembly. I've got a new wiring loom to fit to the car, which I'll probably do myself. I've got some work to do on the interior timber work, which I'll probably do myself. So a few things still to come. So stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.